everyone, I am Kevin Iole, and my guest is a person I've wanted to talk to for a long time. Not only an undefeated pro fighter, but doing an outstanding job really doing interviews. I know as a journalist how tough it is to do interviews with fighters at any time, let alone to do them after they've just fought. Laura Sanko, how are you?
I am well. I will. Thank you so much. That was an over the top introduction, if ever I've heard one. Yes, undefeated. Few of my friends at the UFC has started calling me the strawweight, or excuse me, the atomweight champ of the UFC, because of course there is no atomweight division. But yes,
you retired undefeated. The champ was yours.
There we go. There we go.
I think you've made a great career for yourself on the Dana White Contender Series and now working for ESPN on some of the things that you've done. How much do you think, having been a fighter and you understand what a fighter goes through and what they're thinking after a fight, how much does that help you when you go to interview fighters?
Oh, it's been, this is my son, Burke. It's absolutely everything. I did not go to school for this, so it's been a lot of learning on the job. I mean, my very first Invicta show was live on UFC Fight Pass, and I had never spoken to a camera before.
Wow.
So it's definitely been a little bit of, getting thrown in the deep end and learning on the job. So really the only thing I've had to rely on is my fight experience. But it's not, and I guess not just the fight experience, but the passion I have for the people who participate in this sport. And
Right.
I think that having been through some of those trials and tribulations, certainly maybe not to the extent that they have, but, I have cut weight. I know how horrible that is. I've been knocked out. I've had my nose broken, all of these things that are kind of hard to explain unless you've really been there, kind of collectively give me this really intense connection with the people that I interview, I feel like.
Even if you only have one fight, I feel you're a fighter for life, right? It's kind of like once a Marine, always a Marine.
Yeah.
And what is it that drew you to that life? I mean, it's such a hard life, not only just the actual combat, but the training and as you alluded to, the weight cutting. What drew you to that life?
Yeah, I grew up doing karate, but I did it in the sense that a lot of people's kids do karate. I was not very competitive with it. I did a few tournaments here and there, but it was really, MMA was really a psychological saving grace for me. I was going through a tough time after college, and I missed having some sort of physical outlet. So that's how I found it. But I had no intention of fighting. I think this is a pretty common story, right? I had no intention of fighting when I started. And then the gym that I eventually landed at, what is now called Glory MMA and Fitness in Lee Summit, Missouri, is a very competitive gym, even way back in the day. And it was kind of like I was putting in the hours, and the guys, because there were no girls at the time, the guys at the gym were like, you gotta, come on, just once, just do it once.
Right.
And then of course you do it and you're hooked. But I think, to answer your question about what drew me to it, my background, I would say, is maybe different than I don't know that there really is a stereotypical fighter background, to be honest with you, but
especially MMA is different. Yeah.
Yeah. But the perception, there's a perception that there is a type of person that goes into fighting, right? But I grew up in a really upper middle class household. My parents are still married. We had a great family life. I had everything I could ever want. I was valedictorian. I graduated summa cum laude. I did all these things, but I think, and a lot of things professionally after I graduated from college, but I think I always had this idea in the back of my head that part of what I was achieving was being given to me, whether it was because of who my father was in the community, whether it was maybe even because of how I looked, or whatever the case may be. I had always had this asterisk by some of my achievements that I thought, did I really earn that completely on my own merit? So I think what attracted me to MMA was this idea that what I looked like, who my family was, how much money they had or didn't have, how much money I had or didn't have, doesn't matter for crap once that cage door closes. And it is completely all up to you as to whether you come out victorious or not. So I was attracted to it for that reason, I think.
I would imagine that was a heck of a conversation with mom and dad when you told them, hey, I'm going to get in there and fight the first time.
Yeah. Well, luckily I was well out of the house, but they were still, they still live in town. They're still involved in my life, and they still love to have all sorts of opinions about the things that I do. And yeah, they were, I come from a very conservative what might be people might call a Bible beatery upbringing. So it was it's still foreign territory to them. I mean, they try to be good sports and watch some of the things that I do, but they're definitely not people that are watching the UFC on the weekends.
Now, you referenced your gym, Glory MMA, and I think they were in the news. Obviously, one of the best gyms in the country, but in the news in February because of what James Krause did. And to me, when you talk about MMA, what James Krause did at UFC 247 sort of epitomizes what this sport is all about. After the weigh-in was over, Antonio Arroyo had to pull out of a fight with Trevin Giles, who was the hometown guy, no less, and had the hometown crowd in front of him fighting in Houston. And James Krause takes the fight. Number one, how does he even be in shape enough to take a fight? And then puts on a fight of the night battle. As his teammate and as a person that's been in the octagon or in the cage before, what was it like watching that? And could you believe that he was willing to do that on such short notice?
Okay, the quick answer to that is absolutely. I had no problem believing that he would do that because I've known James for 13 years. He started out as a teammate, then kind of graduated to become my coach, and now gym owner and coach, and sometimes coworker, when he does a few, media things with me. So I've known James a very long time. That part of it did not surprise me whatsoever. But for anybody to do that is just crazy. I was at those fights, and when I landed, James jokingly said, and it was still a joke at this point, he's like, "Oh yeah, I told Sean I'd hop in because Antonio Arroyo fell out," and we're all like laughing about it. And he's like, "There's no way it's gonna happen," and he was definitely. Here's the thing about James: not only is he down to do that type of thing and willing to step in and not give a s about any of the stuff that goes along with it. He's also smart enough to know that was a massive bargaining chip. So without going into great detail, he did a very good job for himself while also helping the UFC out and helping Trevin out at the same time and putting on an absolutely incredible fight. But no, I wasn't surprised one bit that he did that because I remember watching him back in Barnes in the middle of Missouri walk out of the crowd and fight 3 weight classes up. So.
Years ago when I was first starting, this is, over 30 years ago, first starting covering fighting, and I was talking to somebody about how tough it was fighting, and he said to me, put your hand in front of your face and tap yourself in the nose and see how that feels, and it won't feel pretty good. And to think about getting punched by another person who's trained. Now here's Krause going into a fight where the other guy trained for 2 months, and he's just going there to corner somebody. That is just off the charts crazy. It
is crazy, but he's one of those guys, there are very few people out there who are fighting as actively and coaching as actively. There are other active fighters that are coaches, but I would make the argument that he is the most active fighter and simultaneously the most active coach. And because of that, he's in the gym every single day. Now, we all know that there's training for a fight and there's training. So he told me afterwards, he said, I don't ever want to do that again.
Yeah.
I'm really glad I did it. I would do it again, sort of in retrospect, but he's like, that is the most tired I've ever been in my entire life, and I never want to do it again.
I thought he won the fight. I know that Giles ended up getting a split decision. I thought it was 2-1 in favor of Krause, but what an amazing event.
Yeah, it was incredible. And being there, we were all kind of joking about it because, when James was coming up, the only game he had was a game off of his back because he had no wrestling. He would get taken down and he would just triangle people. Then eventually he kind of developed this like head kick game. And it's been incredible to watch him, I would say within the last year or two, really become the fighter that a lot of people around him have always known that he was capable of being. He's just finally really put it all together. And not that long ago, he was talking about, I don't know if I'm going to keep fighting. He never really officially said, I'm going to retire. But it was an idea that he was sort of.
Yeah, he talked to me about that at one point.
Yeah, it was there. It was there. And then I think that, honestly, things like this have really reignited a passion in him. And I think getting paid more has also reignited a passion in him. So I hope to see more of him for sure.
Speaking of passion, I think a lot of people have a passion for a fight upcoming, Khabib Nurmagomedov against Tony
Yes.
Ferguson. I think, when I look at fights that I anticipate, I can't think of the last time there was a fight I wanted to see, boxing or MMA, as much as that particular fight. What kind of fight do you expect? I mean, do you think it's going to be as crazy with as many scrambles and whatnot as I seem to think it will be?
I do. I think it's going to be a crazy fight. And what I love about fights like this is I wake up every day and I can talk myself out of what I was thinking about the fight the day
Yeah.
before. That's how close this fight is in my mind. I sit there and I play, devil's advocate with myself. And just as soon as I start to think, I really see it's going to play out this way, then the other part of my brain kicks in. But what if,
Yeah.
I do think it's going to be crazy. But one thing that really kind of sticks out to me is Khabib has not fought someone who is comfortable working off of their back.
Right.
Everybody that Khabib fights is trying to get back up, and they get exhausted in the process, the up-down cardio. And half the time, obviously Khabib does a beautiful job of wrist wrapping, delivering punishment, wearing you out, but then kind of he'll open an opportunity to allow a fighter to get halfway up or even all the way up, only to bring them right back down. And it's demoralizing, and it's absolutely exhausting. Tony Ferguson has the wrestling to make that very difficult for Khabib to implement. But if Khabib does, get him down, keep him down, I don't know that Tony is terrified about working off the ground, working
Right.
off of his back. He does an amazing job being offensive off his back with elbows. He's very creative. It's not like some people get on their back and they get stuck there and their only hope is a triangle or an armbar. Not so with Tony Ferguson. He has a very wide array of sweeps and offense from the bottom. So, and that's something that Khabib hasn't really seen before. So that's one thing I'm excited for.
And look at the faces of people after they fight Tony Ferguson. I think it's like 10 fights in a row. They're just destroyed.
Yeah. It's like someone's taken a carrot grater and just beat them over the face with it.
Incredible. Now, I want to say this and see if you would agree. I thought going into Conor versus Khabib that Conor had the edge in hand speed. I thought he would be the quicker fighter, but it seemed to me in the fight that Khabib actually was the quicker guy. And I wonder if that will be, A, do you agree with that? And B, do you think in the fight with Tony that Khabib may have, I think most people would say Tony would have the edge in striking, but I'm almost wondering if Khabib might not because of those fast hands he has.
He does have extremely fast hands. I am more of the camp that Conor in that fight was not Conor at 100%. Not to take away from anything Khabib, because honestly, that really opened my eyes up to Khabib as a striker and what he is capable of doing really when he really puts things together. So although I could see him having a slight speed advantage against Tony. Tony is so creative with his angles and with the way that he uses his weapons, the way that he creates traps and trying to get you to think about certain strikes and then doing something that's completely outside of the box. And that's the one thing I think Khabib does not quite have in his game is in striking is the trickery level that Tony does.
Tony has that I don't give an F attitude as he's standing up too. And I wonder if, almost like I'm fighting a crazy guy, right? And does that have a play mentally on a fighter when no matter what you do to them, it seems like they're still smiling and coming forward? And I think there's a mental aspect of fighting sometimes that people overlook.
Yes, this is maybe not the best analogy, but I can't get it out of my head. I fought a girl that I would bet $10,000 was on meth when I fought her, because this was in like backwoods Missouri.
Okay.
Not sanctioned craziness. And, she's like picking at her face and all of that to say it really, really messed with my head. And it was like she couldn't feel anything. And to fight someone who's clearly not on any sort of methamphetamine, but who is in that psychological place of being able to push through any amount of pain, any amount of pressure, and just keep coming and coming, I do think that is a major factor in the fight. But Khabib does not strike me as someone who is easily deterred. And I do find myself, most of the arguments I'm trying to make in my head are for Tony, because I think at the end of the day, I do see Khabib getting this done. But it's going to be a good fight.
Now, I saw an online sports book today put out odds of where the fight might be held. They had international waters, and they had Area 51 here in Nevada.
I love it.
North Korea was only 100 to 1. So I was thinking, that's pretty good odds on North Korea, right? Or pretty bad odds, really, when you think about it. Are you going to be there for the show, and you have any guesstimate where it might be?
I don't know that I will be there. There's a chance I could be, but more than likely not, because it's all of this being upended has really shifted a lot of roles. So last I heard, and I haven't spoken to my boss in maybe a week or so, but last I heard, for the foreseeable future, they're going to be really honing in on essential personnel only. So they might not even have any backstage reporter, which is, would be my role. Or if they do it in Nevada at the Apex, which I don't think is super likely, they would most likely use Megan O'Leary because she lives in Las Vegas. So they're really trying to cut down on travel and cut down on, if you don't absolutely have to be there, we're probably not going to bring you in. So unfortunately, I'm not as essential as I had hoped, Kevin.
You're doing great stuff with Dana too. I like watching the fight with him. I mean, I think one of the reasons the UFC is so successful is they try things out of the box. And I've covered boxing almost all my life. I went to my first fight, believe it or not, the great Sugar Ray Robinson. My dad took me to a fight. It turned out to be the final fight of his career. I went to that fight. I was 6 years old. So more than a half a century of covering fights. But boxing promoters don't try the thing. So, like Dana does that, if you didn't know, now you know. Yeah. And the thing you do with him back there, I think that brings people into the fights in a way that boxing promoters aren't willing to try to do. What is your sense of that segment, and what kind of honor was it for you to be able to go back and do that and kind of experiment with on such a big stage?
It's so fun. I was actually, I can't remember when he called me, but every once in a while, it's rare, I'll get the Dana name will come up on my phone. I'm always like, drop my phone. And he said, hey, I have this idea. We want to do this social media thing. We're going to have you do this. We're going to do that. A lot of just kind of spitting all these ideas at me. And then once we kind of got together and brainstormed and hammered it out, the watching a fight with him was something that I suggested, because at first we just did like a normal interview in his green room. But I feel like fans want to get a sense sometimes of him as a person and him as a fan. Although obviously he can't always just operate as a fan. He's always in Dana mode, particularly on fight night. But I do feel like it's kind of a fun peek behind the curtain of what, what it's like to watch a fight with Dana and what it's like to chat with him about slightly more frivolous stuff. sometimes I get a little bit of heat for not really just, why are you not talking about fighter pay, and why are you not, and that's not the context. That's not the purpose. I'm here to kind of illuminate what he is like as a person, what it's like to watch a fight with him, and to talk about, the fighters that we're watching. I know that you have, interviewed him many, many times, and he could be a little intimidating, in his presence. So it's taken me a little bit, but we have a good relationship. I mean, we have a really good working relationship. So it's gotten more comfortable where I feel like I can kind of be myself, because unfortunately I have a very sarcastic and very teasy personality. But around him, part of me is like, oh, that's my boss. Maybe I shouldn't say that.
See, I say it to him, and I did an interview with him in his office before 236, and that was Max fought Dustin Poirier, and Gastelum fought Adesanya. And I said, I love everything about the show except that you have interim title fights.
Yeah.
And so I told him why I didn't like interim title fights, but he wouldn't let me talk, and he went on and on and on and on and on. And he said, you can't have a show without a thing. So I fought back with him, right? And we had this thing. So he texts me the next day, and he says, everybody around the office here is talking about how I beat the shit out of you on that interview yesterday. And so now when he ended up putting on Masvidal versus Diaz, I texted him and I said, dude, I said, who was right now? I said, now you have a main event with no title fight. And so I kind of So I throw back at him, and I think part of the reason that, he and I have a good chemistry together is because we've known each other a long time. I knew Dana for, when he was a personal trainer wearing one of those little microphones around the front. And so I've known him for that long that I think, he takes stuff from me that he doesn't take from anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's fun watching the fights with him. And there's definitely, one of the things I really enjoy about that moment is seeing how intense he is, just the energy coming off of him as he's watching a fight. And not only that, I will say this, probably certainly more than he ever gets credit for in the public perception. He cares so much about those fighters. There was, I can't remember which fight it was now, but the Duke game was going super long, and it was preventing the UFC undercard from being on big ESPN. And when I walked in the room, he is literally pacing back and forth, and Audie's sitting on the couch, and Audie's laughing at him because Dana is literally losing his mind, not because he's losing money, but because he's like, these kids work so hard because this is their chance to be on ESPN. Right. He's like, when is this game? I mean, he was just losing it. And again, it wasn't about my show, my card, my business needs to be on ESPN. It's like, these fighters, this is their chance. They told all their families that they're going to be on ESPN, and now they're not. He does give an S.
A good take. Hey, I'll let you go. I really appreciate your time, Laura. I'll let you go with this. I love the fact that you are doing this. Megan O'Leary, I think, is fantastic, and I think she's a future superstar in the sports broadcast business. Do you think we're going to get to the day where we see a woman sitting there next to John Anik, being the analyst and doing that? And do you ever harbor any of those aspirations to do that at some point?
Yeah, I absolutely do. That would be the end goal. That would be the dream for me. And it's there are a lot of barriers in the way, and it's not what people necessarily would think. A lot of it has to do with the fact that they really like to put people in that role that fought in the UFC. Right. Well, I don't meet that. I don't meet that qualification. But sometimes I push back and bring up. You have women calling NFL games. You have women calling NBA games. Certainly, they didn't play in the NFL or the NBA. There are a lot of analogies to be drawn with other sports. I think the answer right now is we're not quite there yet, but it is 100% my goal to become more than just a reporter. I would like to be able to insert my fight knowledge, and right. I feel like the last few years I've done a good job of, particularly behind the scenes, gaining the respect of the Bispings and the Paul Felders, and even Dominic Cruz will begrudgingly admit that I know what I'm talking about. So,
even Dom, huh? That's impressive.
Even Dom, you can ask him. He would have to admit it. So I do hope that there's a day. I think personally, that a booth with like a Brendan Fitzgerald, Paul, myself, a 3-person booth, it would be really cool. And I do think that there's something that a woman, myself, I'll use myself as the example, could bring to a conversation, particularly when you're watching female fighters. It's hard for them to, for instance, be too hard on a female fighter that misses weight. A lot of them say, "Oh, I was on my period." I'm in a position where I can say that's bullcrap. Right. That's your job. How old are you? How long have you been having this happen to you every single month? So there's certain things that, and that's the obvious one. There's a lot more than that, but I do think there's a place for it. I think a lot of the fans would freak out about it in a bad way, but I think a lot of the fans would be really supportive of it, and I hope it's me.
I think a lot of people would freak out, but I think a lot more would like it because somebody like you is very talented and obviously earned your stripes. Didn't get it just by, as you said at the beginning of this interview, because of who your father was. You got it because you're good, and you would deserve it if you got it. So I hope it happens. Laura, I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate you.
Awesome stuff.